I'm finding more and more to where empathy is a big part and a big part of what I believe in. I didn't have much of that as an athlete. I certainly have a hell of a lot more as a coach, because I think the role that I'm in now as a coach and then as a parent of two young girls, and then of course as a son to my mom who's getting older, you have to have you cannot be that same person you were as an athlete. So I'm learning more and more about myself, I think, in like every year, every moment. And a lot of it has to do with just being compassionate, being.
It's all good. It's all good. But man, thank you so much for coming on. I want to be respectful of your time. And I have a bunch of stuff to get into today. It's going to be a little bit of a road down memory road for you. But sure. The first question I want to ask you, well, the Olympics is still in our minds. It's still not too long ago. But I want to go back before the games that were canceled in 2020, right? The pandemic games, so to speak. You being the head coach now, G, there's a lot of moving parts that you have to handle.
Yeah.
How did you navigate through that? But I want to get your perspective from two different parts. One, family first, right? You're still hearing about the COVID-19. You got to be able to protect your family and give them as much information as you have. But also, you have a team depending on you for leadership as to what to go about next. How do we move to the next decision? How did you navigate through that whole situation as a whole?
Well, you know what, and that's a great question, because for me, right from the start, health was right up front. It was the most important thing. Not just my own health, but the health of the athletes, the health of my kids. Just making sure that the decisions that I make, think about the ramifications that they will have. And for me, obviously, I think the decision to postpone the games at the time that they made it was the right decision. And I think communicating that back to the athletes, maybe the timing itself wasn't the greatest, but, you know, athletes are in a lot of ways, they just want to get over there. They just wanted the games to happen. The impact of the postponement, of course, had an impact on a lot of athletes. Some athletes didn't end up retiring just because they had that extra year tacked on. But when you look at the overall impact of the games from a health perspective, I didn't want to travel. I didn't want athletes traveling. We were trying everything we can to really give as much information around, the pandemic and around the coronavirus as we could to the athletes. And of course, to the staff and to ourselves, just making sure that we were taking care of our health and putting your health first, because at the end of the day, this is still a sport. It's not, we're certainly not curing cancer or anything of that nature. So you really have to, I think, approach it in those type of lenses.
When you got there, G, the media is saying a whole bunch of things, right? They were saying a whole lot of things in 2016, especially with the Zika virus and all of that stuff as well, too. Obviously, I haven't been too far removed from it, so I still have a lot of people who are at the games, but that's their perspective. They tell me one side of it, but you got to look at things as the whole spectrum. When you actually got to the games, G, what was different, and what was things that you were like, wait a minute, that's not that serious? And I want to ask this, G, because I was asked this a lot too. Do you think not having the fans there made a big of an impact, as people were saying? Because I know if it's me and you want the team to just be there so you can focus, right? So what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. From the moment we landed in Tokyo, it was different. We spent about 8 hours in the airport just getting processed, and it was something completely different. It was not anything we were prepared for it. We weren't prepared for 8 hours. We were certainly prepared for like 4 to 5 hours in the airport, because we had an advanced team go ahead of the main group, and they were kind of reporting back so we could prepare the athletes before they boarded the flight to Tokyo. So from that perspective, the whole piece in getting to our holding camp in Gifu was long and arduous, but the athletes, you know what, nobody complained about anything, because again, they were kind of warned about this type of thing happening, and just so everyone just kind of took it in stride for the most part. With regards to the actual competition in Tokyo, I felt, they did such a remarkable job, I think, with the event and the way they hosted the entire thing, that not having fans in the stands really, as far as I'm concerned, didn't have a huge impact. Now, the athletes that are out there competing will obviously tell you, some of them will say, you know what, we missed the fans, we would have loved to have had them, and I think that that's fair. However, the depth or the type of competition that we ended up having was, I think, no less. Nothing was taken away from it because there were no fans there. Okay. And for me personally, I mean, I think a full stadium, obviously athletes want to run in front of a packed stadium, but I think the level of performance was still very, very high. And I mean, you think back to, the 4 hurdles or Andre's 200 meters. Listen, those are remarkable performances. And those would have been, I think they would have been as fast, as remarkable, whether you had, clearly if you had like 50,000 people in the stands or not. So I think as far as I'm concerned, the games went off really well. All the mitigation that they put around, the coronavirus and what athletes and staff were allowed to do was perfect. Everyone kind of adhered to that, and the results spoke for themselves.
In the height of everything, G, you have to get up at a certain time and make sure that everybody's on track. How do you find balance among all of this, right? Because everything kind of flows through you. Maybe someone has to protest certain things or whatever the case may be, but man, it can be a lot for any person, even though you've been to a bunch of games yourself, right? How do you find balance amongst all of this?
Well, balance for me is always just, taking the time for myself, like early in the mornings, and just kind of recalibrating, remembering that, again, we're doing something that we're enjoying, and that yes, we've got an amazing staff of team managers. We have amazing staff of coaches on the ground to deal with all the event groups. So really, it's just really about tying all those pieces together, but making sure that I am delivering an amount of calm. Like you certainly don't want to be hysterical about the situation. We know what the situation is. We don't have to wear it every single day that we go out there. We get up every morning and go, okay, make sure we hit all the checkpoints in order to get the athletes and staff out to the track to compete. Again, we try to make it all about the athletes, and simply it's not about us. It's about doing the very best job we possibly can to ensure a safe environment for the athletes to get out there and perform. But you also have to take the time, either in the mornings before things get crazy or in the evenings, just to really recalibrate and make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well.
G, one last question before we get into the athlete side of you. As a coach, a head coach in this position, right? Organizations, their leaders, different companies, you're put with a lot of pressure, right? Pressure situations. People are handling certain contracts. Maybe you're about to try to close on a deal and you don't know, or you don't feel comfortable with handling all this pressure. If someone is in a position, G, where they don't know how to deal with the pressure, right? What are some tips that you would give them that has helped you when it comes to that?
In a lot of ways, for me, the pressure is, you've got to slow it down. You just can't get caught up in the pace of what's happening. You've got to slow it down within yourself and take the necessary time in between, the pause, if you will. I'm a big believer in stillness and really taking time to really recognize that it's easy to get on this conveyor belt that we call like high performance sport and then lose yourself in there. From time to time, you may need to just jump off and walk. Just take your time with every single process. And by doing that, I think you find a way to really mitigate the pressure involved. We can't get around it. It's a pressure situation. The pressure really is on the athletes. As far as I'm concerned, yes, as coaches, we have pressure because we want to see the performance. We've got funding partners that want to see performance as well. But ultimately, if we don't create an environment to where the personal coaches and athletes feel supported and feel that they have everything that they need to put that athlete on a podium, or put that athlete in a top 8 position, or put that athlete in a position to get a personal best at the Olympic Games, then we're not doing our job. And ultimately, if we're not doing our job, we're not going to get the results, and the athletes won't perform the way we want them to perform. So a lot of ways we have to be able to separate what's real pressure and what's kind of manufactured pressure. What is stuff that we're kind of creating for ourselves versus what's really there. And I think when we figure those two pieces out, then we can act accordingly.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Again, I think everybody deals with pressure, big, small, whatever the case may be. Even 3-year-old kids deal with pressure in some capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But I want to go back, man, because to this day, I don't think many people understand and realize that you're originally from Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago. People see you as he's from Ottawa through and through, but originally from Trinidad. What was those times like growing up for you, G? And you got to give me some context, because I always get in trouble with which one has the better beaches, right? Because I understand one is a beach and the other is just not.
Well, yeah, the context, I came to Canada really, so about five or 6 years old. And, right from Port of Spain, which is the capital city in Trinidad. And when we came to Canada, it was like the early 70s, and my mom came up here because my grandmother was here, and this was obviously an opportunity to have a better future, a better life for her kids. And I come from a family of 6 kids, and so this was an opportunity for us to kind of get a bit of a leg up in Canada. I mean, really, it really came down to, if we stayed in Trinidad, we'd kind of follow the trend of a lot of the Caribbean folks. And then there were no opportunities for my mom. So being up here, obviously, and I've been in Ottawa since that time. So yeah, people looking at me would certainly think that, I was born and raised right here in Ottawa, but no, Trinidad and Tobago and the south part of the island. And I would argue the beaches, I would say probably, I've been to the beaches in Trinidad, and I feel like I have to be honest, and I think the beaches in Jamaica are far better. I really do. But
you're going to cause a lot of beef with this one, G.
I know the Trinis are going to off with my head, so.
I think, when you came to Canada, G, a lot of principles that we have as people come from our foundation, from our parents, grandparents, guardians, neighborhood even. What are some things that your mom and your grandmother instilled in you? Maybe it was something that they said that stuck with you to this day. Because sometimes, I know for me growing up, my grandparents would say something like hard work pays off, or, if you're patient enough, in time it will come. But as a 4 or 5-year-old kid, you're like, what are you talking about? Right? What are some things that helped you build your principles that maybe your mom, grandmother instilled in you, or maybe you saw indirectly?
Well, it's funny. My mom is obviously, like my biggest hero in terms of watching her, the way she lived her life, and the ability to really help her kids the way she did. But my mom has always been a very spiritual woman. So I grew up in the church from the time I could remember. And so your lessons learned in Sunday school and those type of things on how to treat people, the type of life you'd want to live, your best life in a sense, and having empathy. Like my mom was always, Glenroy, it doesn't matter. Obviously we want you to make us proud. We want you to do your very best, but the principles of honesty, empathy, treat people with compassion, take a second to reflect before you, even if you say something that you shouldn't say, make sure you go back and apologize. Always really thinking about things more from a spiritual realm than really from the way you would automatically react to a situation. So my mom has always been, even to this day, the person that if I have an issue, a lot of times I'm thinking, well, she's not going to be able to help me with something like this. What does she know about, what does she know about Olympic sports? But then I go and I talk about the situation with her. And, the little nuances of information that you get, you're like, wow, it's amazing. So it's always been, my mom has always been kind of like my rock around a lot of those things. And she, it's funny. I think as adults, we sometimes don't give our parents the credit that they deserve, because we're thinking that no way they would have experienced anything remotely close to this, but maybe not in particular to that particular situation, but something similar. And the messaging is still the same. It doesn't change, right? So I've learned that, and I've also, the other thing my mother always said to me was, I never worry about you, because I know you're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine always. I worry about your brothers and sisters, but I don't but I don't worry about you. So I kind of try to live up to that, right?
That is such a powerful testament, because as caregiving parents, they always going to worry, but for her to say that, wow. The transition, G, for me, it was tough, right? Coming from Jamaica you went to Ottawa, I went to Yellowknife. The weather was a little bit different, but, seeing different cultures, first of all, I saw dogs in houses. That was never a thing in Jamaica, so I didn't understand that part. But the weather, the people, the culture, and all of these things, it took me a while to get used to. I went from a place where there was many Black kids in the area to go into a school where I was maybe one of 4 inside the school, and those rest was my cousins, right? So what was that transition like for you, G? Did you have any issues there for you learning a new language? Because even though Trinidad and Tobago, they speak broken English in a way, it's different as well too. So what was that transition like for you? Did you have an easy time with it, or did it take time?
No, you know what? It took time. I remember being in elementary school, and the first probably week in school, the teacher told me straight up, she's like, you're gonna have to speak English. Clearly, what I was speaking was not English, and you're gonna have to speak English because nobody can understand you. I remember we came to Canada in August, and the month of August. And I remember I thought it was great because it was still relatively warm. There was no change. But then when the cold weather hit, where I went to school in Ottawa, it was like walking distance to the apartment we lived in. It was maybe 15 minutes from the apartment to the school. And I remember the first time I saw snow, and it started snowing, and we had to walk home. And I was just like, what the heck? I can't, what is this? What's going on? My mother had to leave because she'd look out the balcony to see us walking home. She had to leave the building to come and walk us the rest of the way because I was frozen. I couldn't move. I didn't know what was going on. The whole concept of cold, snow. Okay. I wasn't advancing in school because again, my language wasn't what, was expected. So I think at the time when we came to Canada, it was an unforgiving time for Black kids, because again, I think especially in Ottawa here, the schools, every school I went to from elementary school right up to high school. Well, high school was a bit better, but right up from grade 1 up to grade 8, we were my family was the only Black family in the school. So, again, you navigate those things, and then of course you end up going down to a place like Louisiana State for university, and then it's a complete opposite, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of learnings. There's a lot of course, the cultural shift was immense, and it was about trying to get your footing the best way you could, right? Adapt to the situation. And that's essentially what we had to do. You had to learn to speak the language, in essence, here in Ottawa. And that's why my kids now, even though I don't speak French, they're in French school, because again, setting yourself up for success is part of understanding where you are and what the requirements are to function at a high level where you are.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, G, because I missed 64 days of school. I couldn't handle the cold. My mom was late coming home from work one day by 10 minutes, and I caught frostbite in my left ear, right? So it was all bad. So I definitely get that. Yeah, but you and I have something in common, man. We played soccer early, right? And to this day, I still think I was a better soccer player than I was track and field athlete and football player. Like it was, it was very, I took it seriously, and all my cousins were older than me. So I had to get better because I always played with the older kids. But for you, you didn't stick with soccer. You didn't stick with it.
What I should have. If you look at soccer, what soccer is today and what soccer was when I was 14, 15 years old is completely different. I mean, soccer is a bigger game. It's like you can actually get somewhere in the sport, whereas you couldn't do it back when I was doing it. And I suffered a disappointment, I think, when I was 15, 16, and I was getting, everyone in soccer was like, wow, you're so fast. You ever think about track? And of course you get intoxicated by all the positive reinforcements. And the next thing you know, you're running track, so, and I'm with you. I don't know. I think I would have, I certainly preferred track and field, and I'll tell you why, because in soccer, I always had this mentality that I worked much harder than everyone else. And if everyone worked at the same level that I worked at, then I would have been fine on the team. But I always struggled with that team aspect, just because I didn't think people took it as seriously as I did, nor did they work as hard, and were they as invested as I was in the outcome. And after a while, I played soccer relatively young, and I was starting to get really frustrated with the level of focus that the other athletes were putting into it. It just wasn't up to my standards. And so when I went to track and field, the buck stopped with me. Whatever happened, it was on me. I couldn't blame no one. I can't blame my coaches. It's me. I didn't perform the way I was supposed to. So I preferred that.
Gee, when you got to high school, when you eventually attended LSU, Louisiana State University, right? But what was that part like, right? Like the process of figuring out, like, I can further myself here, right? That's one aspect of it. But you also have to convince your mom, like, this is going to be okay if you let me go down there, because again, mom wants to make sure that all of the kids are in the same house. And if you go down there, I don't know that coach. I don't trust that coach. I don't know what they have going on. So I want to just touch on that, G, but also, decision making, right? I always felt like a lot of athletes don't have necessary information that they need to make a calculated decision, but they're just making it because of the name. But sometimes the big name school may not be the best to where you should go, and it's conducive for your progression as an athlete. So what was that time like for you? And even what made you even pick LSU?
Yeah. Well, I didn't pick LSU right out of the gates. To be honest with you, I actually went to Iowa State in Des Moines, Iowa. Oh, actually in Ames, Iowa. Very, very small town. So I was at Iowa State for probably 4 months. And the decision to go there, the coach came up to Ottawa, talked to my mom. We talked about the academics and all those things. My mom was happy with it. And then, of course, when I got down there, it was something completely different. And I knew my mom would she would have my head if I didn't, if I wasn't taking the level of academics that was agreed upon, then she didn't want me there. So after like 3 months, I was like, look, I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like these courses. This is not what I wanted to do. So I had a conversation with her, went back home, ended up enrolling at Ottawa U. And it was only after that, I think a year after being at Ottawa U, I went down to a training camp at LSU, and the coach right then and there offered me a scholarship to be down there. But it was the difference between going to Iowa, going to Ottawa U, and then ending up at LSU was maturity. I think time had passed, and I was better prepared by the time I got to LSU than I was the two universities before that. So my time at LSU was then very seamless. And I think around the decision to go down there, it was simply, they say it takes a village in a lot of ways to raise kids. I had some really good, elementary school teachers, high school teachers that I stayed connected to. And these are the source of inspiration, the source of knowledge, the source of direction for me. The people that are looking out for you, people that are saying, hey, look, and people that you can use as a sounding board with ideas that you had. And so it's pooling it all together and then making the right decision at the time. And I'm not saying the decision will always be the right decision. It wasn't the right decision for me to go to Iowa State. it was the right decision for me to come home and spend an extra year at home going to Ottawa U. And then it was the right decision at the time to go to LSU. So sometimes these decisions come about in a roundabout way. It's not always a direct path to the decision. So sometimes you've got to go a bit circular in a sense to get there. But the fact is, you're getting there, and that's what's important. And I'll tell you, for me, being at LSU at the time that I was there was perfect. I didn't get the full 4 years. I ended up with 3 years, but it was the right time, and it was the best experience of my life.
G, you got there, and then, you can sort of say the legend of Glenroy Gilbert began, because you didn't go there predominantly as a sprinter, right? Speaking to your former coach, Dan, it was a certain injury that happened that made you transition over to sprinting. What was your time at LSU like, G? And you've always been a person who works hard. You've always been disciplined. You've always been dedicated. But now you get to an NCAA system where even though you may have more dedication and more discipline than all the other athletes, there are some guys who are just extremely talented. They can bypass that. What was that experience like? Because in the SEC, you have to bring your A game every single week, because if you don't, your scholarship is on the line.
Well, you certainly know about that, right? You know about the SEC. It's no joke. I mean, listen, when I got down to LSU, it was an eye opener for me. I remember I landed in January, and I think at the end of February, early March, we were getting ready for the conference meet, and we went to Florida State, University of Florida for the conference meet, and I was just like, yeah, I had been to the Olympics. I was seasoned. This was nothing for me. And I'm telling you, I got to that competition, and I'm sure Akeem, Dad has tipped his hat here. It probably told you all about it. It was horrible. It was the most, to say it was eye-opening is an understatement. I certainly at that moment recognized that A, I wasn't as good as I thought I was, and B, these athletes here in the US, especially in the SEC conference, they don't play around. I mean, they come to win. I mean, winning at all costs is what they live for. I mean, I had young guys. I was probably 2 years older than most of the guys. And I had these young guys, 18, 17 years old, just blowing my doors off. And I didn't even know what I got myself into. I remember getting back to my dorm room in Baton Rouge after the conference meet. And I had to sit and ponder, like, how am I going to navigate all of this? Right. It was just, I mean, I have to get ready I'm going to go to a conference meet outdoors. So what's that going to be like? So my thinking, my approach, everything had to get a reset, because I knew that there was no possible way I could be successful if I went in there with the same mentality that, yeah, I've been to the Olympics, I competed at Olympic Games, and I'm more than ready for this. It's only an SEC. No. So I had to really change my focus, my thinking, and start studying the athletes that I trained with, because they were on a different level. So if I was going to be successful, I had to get on that level as well.
Gee, how didn't that humble ego dismantle, you can say, help you, right? Because sometimes people get in a position where they have that same thought, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, man, these guys are different, right? I remember at my junior college alone, I was number 2 in North America in the 1 and the 2, then coming down there, and I was the 5th fastest person on my team. And I had to sit with that in my dorm one day, and I said, okay, Akeem, what are you going to do now? But a lot of athletes, they get to certain positions and they see that and they don't want no parts of it. So how did you reshift and recalibrate your mind to say, okay, how can I, one, even the playing field, and how can I may even get an edge? But that also requires you to let your ego go, because again, you've been to a games, right? A lot of your teammates haven't been to any games yet, but it's different. How do you handle the ego in that moment?
Well, again, ego was the one thing that I had a lot of, I think, when I was in university and I was at LSU. But when you're in a university program like LSU, where, talent is just like overflowing, like everyone, these guys were so talented. And I started taking stock of where exactly do I fit in the hierarchy of the athletes that Dan had, for example. And I was near the bottom, hands down. I was near the bottom. And I had to, it took me probably a good year to adjust to where I was, to adjust to the fact that I wasn't the best guy. Like I said, I'd made the Olympic team. I was number one in Canada in long jump. I'd done all those things. But here I was in the US and I was training with a bunch of guys where I was probably fifth on the depth chart in terms of talent. So the idea is exactly what you said, Akeem, is sitting and thinking to yourself, how important is it for you to be successful here? And then figuring out what it is you need to do. And that requires a shift in the mentality that you take every single day that you go out to the track. Like, what are you going to do differently? How are you going to adapt? I was used to having my own coach, as most people in Canada are. They have their own personal coach and they work along. You go to the US, you're one of, like Dan had, I think, 15 guys on the runway on Tuesday and Thursdays when we were doing jump work. And so he would send me off to go do something on my own. So that was a shift for me. So adaptation and being flexible and adaptable to the situation is what you have to start to get used to. Because if you have this fixed mindset, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble, and you're going to suffer disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. So learning from experiences that present themselves. So, I mean, it wasn't like the next meet I was stellar, because I was still horrible. I was still horrible. So it took me some time to get my footing, but I also believed at the time that I could be better than I was. And as long as you're striving to be better, as long as I always measured myself up against the American athletes, because it was, to me, the pinnacle of our sport was to be, if you can get to an SEC or get to an NCAA and win medals, then you're one of the best track athletes out there. So for me, it was always that. And that took me some time. But again, I had to drop a lot of the ego. I had to drop a lot of the expectations that I had of myself and kind of reshape it and have an incremental approach to getting back to a level where, okay, now I know I can compete with these guys. So it did take some time, and that's probably about a year of adapting to where I was, to the new coaching, to the new training environment, to the training group, and accepting that you're not starting at the top, but you've got to start from the bottom and work your way up.
Dan was telling me about that same thing. He was like, I used to have 15 athletes on the runway, and I would just look, watch, walk down. But Dan speaks very highly of you, G. He credits you for being one of the first Canadians to actually come down there to train. And then more other Canadians started to come down, Donovan, some others. But he would always used to tell me about some of your training days, right? I had heard some of these legendary stories. I heard one day you guys had something like 30-something block starts. Now, I don't know how much the story has stretched.
Yeah.
But G, that the environment impacts you a whole deal and it makes you better. Before you got to the 96 games and the gold medal came, 92, you guys won gold in the 4x1, but now you're starting to see some of the timing start to come back in your favor, all the sacrifices there. But what were those training days like? Because your training group, from what I understand, from what I've been told, you had some mega stars in there from all different parts of the country. So what was that like? And what were some of those challenges like? Is that block story true, G? Like you got to give me the backstory on these, because when I hear this, I'm like, no way these athletes nowadays, including myself, would have been able to handle that much volume of training.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Coach Paff, the guy, he cut his teeth on a lot of us in terms of what volume of work can you humanly do and still be productive on the other end of it. We would have start days anywhere from 15 to 18 block starts. And I'm one of those guys that 15, okay, I'm going to 18. Donovan, on the other hand, is 15. Okay, I'm going to do 8. So you really had your varying types of athletes. And I think in our group, We had Oba, we had Kareem, we had a lot of sub 10. I think at one point we had about 5 guys that had run under 10 seconds. And our group was a very powerful group. And again, with all varying personalities as well. So, you learn to work in the situation that you're in, but you also learn to use the guys around you to help you get better. Right. So, yeah, it was tough. Dan was actually a very empathetic coach. I think he recognized that not everyone was at the same level. Not everyone, people had different strengths. My work capacity was one thing. I would do it until I dropped. Whereas you'd have a guy like Donovan or Oba, who would stay in his flats and never put spikes on until probably he was getting ready to race. So you had different. And Dan did a really good job of navigating and kind of juggling all the different personalities. And that's what track and field and sprinting is about, is working with all those different people, right? So, I mean, it was tough, but at the same time, let me tell you something. It prepared me for everything that came after that. Our 2 world championship goals on the Olympic gold medal in '96. All of it was because of all that work that we did in the lead up. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes Dan has a way of making his stories a bit grander but I think that happens in time, because I find myself doing the same thing. Right? So yeah, it was a remarkable time and a great group of sprinters. And that's the one thing I'll say about Dan was he was a coach for the athletes. Like, really everything he did was for the group that he had in Baton Rouge, because we moved from Baton Rouge, I think, in 1995 to Austin, Texas for the next 5 years. So he was that type of coach.
Gee, as a man, right, we want to progress in different areas of our lives. And I've always been one. I didn't just want to be, Akeem the athlete, because that's such a small part of a person's life. But as a man now, from Trinidad coming to Canada, you were already in the US, then you went back home, then you came back. How were you progressing yourself, right? Like your personal development and your mental space. Who was G the person at this time, right? What were some things that you were really trying to grow? Because, we are all more than just what we do. Right? This is a small portion of it, but so many times we're consumed by what we do. We think that's all we ever are. So in this stage, in this moment, what was that like for you? How were you finding room for your own personal development?
You know what? I'll tell you one thing. As an athlete, I was one person. I certainly was, and now, even kind of growing out of the athletic role, over 20 years ago now, and it's almost like every day I'm finding more and more to where empathy is a big part and a big part of what I believe in. I didn't have much of that as an athlete. I certainly have a hell of a lot more as a coach, and more of a person who is around a lot of young people, a lot of people trying to find their footing. And I think for me, understanding and really not judging certain situations, really helping and finding ways to really meet people halfway, or to understand and not to take things personal. There was a time if someone said something to me, of course, it would be a personal attack on me, and I don't do well with those things anymore. In fact, I've put a lot of those things away, and I try to listen more. I try to listen more rather than to try to give people solutions. I will listen. And when you talk to me, you're going to get authenticity. You're going to get honesty, and I'm not going to come in. Because I think the role that I'm in now as a coach, and then as a parent of two young girls, and then of course as a son to my mom who's getting older, you have to you cannot be that same person you were as an athlete. So I'm learning more and more about myself. I think in like every year, every moment, and a lot of it has to do with just being compassionate. Being understanding, taking the time. Don't take anything for granted. Don't take it for granted. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll give you a quick story. The other day I was with my daughter, Sadie, and I was saying to her, we pull up to my mom literally lives about a minute away from me. So we pull up to her house, and Sadie sits in the car, and I get out and I go up. And then halfway up to her house, I stopped. And I turned around and I looked at Sadie and I said, get out of the car and come up here and say hello to your grandmother. And in that moment, it dawned, and this is how these lessons kind of come to me. In that moment, I said to her, never take for granted that you're going to see her tomorrow or you're going to be able to see her later. Get out of the car now because you're here now and come and say hello. Even if it's a brief 30 seconds, hey, Mom, how are you? Good. And get back in the car. But take that time because tomorrow's not guaranteed to any of us, and we shouldn't plan on having things go our way then. Just take the time every step to be as conscious as you can be in the moment, like live in the moment. A lot of times that's what I've been doing more and more now. And instead of living in the past or living too far in the future, I live right here, right now. And that's, this conversation that we're having, I'm into this conversation. I'm not thinking about what I have to do an hour from now because it's useless to me. You have authentic relationships when you just focus in that time that you're there with that person.
Man, gee, this question just came to mind as you were talking about your daughter. You said you have two. Your mom instilled some things in you. What are some things, G, that you try to instill in your daughters and you hope that they take? Because we never know what they may take or what they may not take. But what are some things that you maybe intentionally try to do to instill in them so maybe they'll get it at some point down their road when they're ready to?
Well, the big piece for me is family. Like I tell them, you know what? You'll have a lot of close friends. You'll have a lot of close relationships, but your family, you've got to make time. And everything I do with them is around family. I know they have their friends and that's all good, but make time for your family. Don't take for granted that you're going to see them birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, it doesn't matter how big. It could be just 5 of us here, 6 of us here, but we make time for family. Make time for family. Be honest and transparent with who you are with your friends. Don't, again, use your own common sense. Use your own. Don't let your friends, and I'm pretty sure you've heard this from your mother, let your friends lead you down a road, lead you astray. We've all been, you pass some of that on, maybe less impactful as my mom did it to me, but all the lessons and all the things that I learned from my mom, like spirituality as well, like,
yes.
Make sure my kids are understand that there's something bigger than them, bigger than me, bigger than what we are right now in this moment. So understand that part of humanity and who they are as part of humanity. So there are always teachable moments, like for my kids, and I try to be in that moment so that I can educate them of the situation. So again, I compassion, being honest, have empathy. Don't judge. Try not to. We do that so easily. It's like, don't judge people. Wait to hear them, because what you're probably going to judge on something that you don't even understand. There's a backstory. There's something that preceded this position that they're in. So take time and really build meaningful relationships with folks. And the way you do that is making sure that you're present when you're talking to them and being with them.
That's powerful, G. Thanks for that. That's a great reminder for all of us.
Yeah.
I always want to show the backstory and more in the person rather than just what people know, right? They know about the 1996 Olympics, and we're going to touch on that before we get into the last couple of questions, right? But that's the stuff that people don't see, the progress and the growth of the person over time. But in 1996, G, yeah, you guys know you got the gold medal. But from what I understand, based on conversations I've had with Donovan and a few others, that was a tough time for you. You were also going through some things away from the track, right? What was going into those games like for you, and how did you handle the balance of some of the personal stuff that you were having, right? I still have a job to do here, right? Because that can play so much on a person's psyche. Right. But how did you navigate through that at that moment, G? And man, nobody ever talks about the mental space of an athlete when they are in the pinnacle of the moment that they're supposed to perform well. There's still pressures, there's still nerves, but you're also trying to navigate through, man, when the games is done, I have to go back home to real life, and my real life may not be stable. How did you navigate through all of these emotions and this feeling during this time in your life? And obviously, what did it feel like to win the gold? What did it feel like to break the medal?
Well, I'll tell you, it certainly was like a really, really dark time. And I think reflecting on winning and being a part of a winning team at the Olympic Games, anytime I reflect on that, I also reflect on the path and the journey from what I was dealing with in Austin, Texas, all the way up to Atlanta and then beyond. And I'll tell you, having teammates, I think in this instance, Donovan was huge. He really, at our Canadian championships, and he was aware of some of the things that I was dealing with when I came up to Montreal, because we were training together in Austin. And, I remember he said to me as we were warming up, he's like, okay, G, you got to put all this stuff behind you. We've got 2 days here. You got to run 100. You got to, we've got to get through the 100. We got to get named to I had to get named to the team. I mean, he was doing pretty good for himself, so that wasn't the issue, but he was more concerned at the time with making sure that I kind of parked that personal stuff and focus here in this moment on trying to make the Atlanta Olympic team. So I got through that, and I'll tell you, it was probably easily the darkest time in my life, and I got through that, got to the Olympics, certainly did not perform in the open 100 the way I had expected to perform. But again, I had to reconcile that was the path I was on, and there was no real way around it. It wasn't that I was out there trying to not make a final. I was trying to make the final. That was the plan, right? So yeah. When that didn't happen, I remember being it was like to say I was winded, I was beyond. It was the darkest and lowest time I've ever experienced as an athlete. I remember getting back to our accommodations, which are in Buckhead, and I went into my room, and I think I stayed in the room for 2 days. And I remember Dan came up to the room one day and just knocked and handed me a book. It was called Out of the Darkness into the Light. I can't remember who the author is. I remember the name because I sat in that room, and it was like a 300-page book, and I read through the book. And the story of this individual in the book really reset my thinking. It really helped me. It showed me that I'm not the only one that is going through struggles. I'm not the first one. I certainly won't be the last one. And you've got to get to the other side of it. And how do you get there? Just change your mindset, because I was going home. I was done. After the 100, I was like, I'm so frustrated and so disappointed with the sport. I need to get out of here. And after reading this book and basically recalibrating my thinking, I was now focused on getting ready with my teammates for the Olympic Games and for the relay event specifically. And after we won, I'll tell you, even though it was the most amazing period in my sporting career, I was still bogged down with a lot of emotions from everything that had happened. And I really don't think, even to this day, as I think about us at the Olympics, anytime I see pictures of us on the podium or walking out to get our medals, this, that, and the other, it's the one thing that's always on my mind, because I knew exactly, how many times can you say, I know exactly what I was thinking in that moment? Yeah. Very few people can say that, but I can tell you from start to finish what was on my mind and what was going on with me. But because I was wearing it, and I see the pictures, I see the videos, and I'm like, yeah, I was wearing all of it. And I think in time, it just, of course, winning the medal was a dream come true, because it was something that I had set out to do since I was 15, since I started track and field. And I think having that experience, having been able to share that experience with a bunch of people has been the most amazing accomplishment in my life from an athletic standpoint. And, it took some time after that to really reconcile what we were able to accomplish and all the people that rallied around me to support me through that journey to get there.
Gee, thanks for sharing that, man. I think, I don't think a lot of people understand what, obviously you see athletes and sometimes they're perceived as superheroes in a way, right? But even Superman has kryptonite, So, last question, G, before the little fun 5 questions, with the height of everything that's been going on these past couple of years, man, People's mental space has been taking a big hit. Life, when Murphy's Law, when things hit you, more things are going to continue to hit you, G. But if there was one word of advice or something that you would give to help someone who may be in that dark place, in that dark space, what would you say to them? What are some words that you would give them to help uplift their spirits, to help them get out of that space and continue moving?
You know what? I would tell anybody who's struggling and dealing, it's going to get better. I mean, I know it seems now that it's the darkest before the storm, but then the storm happens, but then it clears and it gets better. Some of this stuff, I mean, a lot of our athletes are struggling. You reach out to, there's a lot of services, there's a lot of stuff out there now that you can access, but some of this stuff also makes you better. So you just have to recognize that, yeah, it's tough now, but it's going to get better. Like we've scratched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to, my testimony as an individual who traveled kind of a bit of a journeyman's pace to where I am now. And when I started this, nobody could tell me I'd be sitting here having this conversation with you now. So that's how I know it does get better. You just have to stick in there long enough to just navigate through it. It gets better, and we can trust that it will. We just have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and just weathering it. Surrounding yourself with positive people, with people that's got your back, people that care about you. Those things, if you do that, you're gonna come out on the other end of it. And you know what? You're gonna have an amazing story to tell to anyone, a story of survival, perseverance, and really sticking to something and getting through it and being successful on the other end of it.
It's funny you say that. I have when you talk about scratching the surface, I have like 50 questions others that I have than the ones that I asked today. But the time doesn't always permit it. But obviously another time, when the studio comes to fruition, G. But last fun 5 questions, G, shouldn't be too taxing, but sometimes some people struggle with them a little bit. But here we go. You ready to go?
Yep.
Question 1, G. If you were trapped on a deserted island for a week, like Tom Hanks in Castaway, right? What are 3 things that you would take with you?
A raft? No, just kidding. 3 things I would take with me on a deserted island. I'd probably take a fire starter. I'd take shit. Oh man, that is a tough one. Jeez. Gee, I don't know. That's Akeem. That's a tough one. What could I take? Anything?
Yeah, anything. I asked the fellas on here, the 2016 4x1 group, and Dre said bug spray. I'm like, man, you're gonna waste your thing on the bug spray.
Okay, so anything I could take with me. Okay, I'll take on a deserted island for how long?
A week.
A week. Okay, I would take a Wonder Bar because I have an affinity for Wonder Bars. I would take. I certainly would not take my phone. I would take clean drinking water. Okay, and I would take materials to make like a lean-to.
Okay. 2, G. Us sprinters. We like to eat. We like to eat good too. What is one meal that you could eat every day for a month if you had to?
You know what? I think I like ackee and saltfish.
Oh, come on, G. Come on now.
And fried dumplings. Yeah, I can probably eat that.
I see the look on your face. You about to have some today.
I'm telling you, I would eat that every single day if I could.
Question 3, G. I really value time. I think time is one of the most precious commodity that we really have to be conscious of how we spend it, whom we spend it with. If you could sit down in a room, G, and spend 5 uninterrupted hours with 5 people, past or present, who would you want to sit down with?
One would be my high school or my public school principal, Mr. Monroe, who passed away. The second one would be my youngest brother, Bruce, who passed away when he was 14. I would love to sit in a room unfortunately, these people are no longer here. I would love to sit in a room with my father and speak to him for 5 uninterrupted hours.
Mm.
I would love to just sit there with my mom. Again, we have times that are fleeting here, there, but my mom would be key to that. And the other one would be my kids.
Wow.
Sit down
Wow.
quietly with them.
Wow. Wow. I don't want to be a fly on the wall with that one. You know, I feel like there's just so much wisdom, right? And a whole bunch of things that go with it. Well, that just brought me to another question, but I'll save that one. Question 4, man. You know, 1996, you guys got gold. You broke the Canadian record, had the world record at the time, correct? For a little bit there?
No. It was just a Canadian record. They speculate what could have been, but that's speculation. We know that.
Broke the Canadian record. 2016, G, we broke the record, right? My quartet broke the record. In a 2-lane race, G, who's winning? Is it your squad or is it my squad? And it's
No. In a 2-lane race, you guys are done. You guys are in a 2-lane race. It is over. No way. No. We're not losing. We're not. This time Donovan would keep the baton and run through the line. So no, we're not losing.
Nah, I don't know if Andre got out on the anchor leg. Hey, I guess that is the speculation of something that's never going to happen, right?
Well, at the end of the day, too, you guys broke the record. So really, all of this is conjecture, right? So,
Gee, last question. You know, with everything that you've been through and able to overcome, you know, you just spoke about the loss of your brother. At 14, and that brings a whole whirlwind of questions for me. And but it's not easy to deal with. It's hard. You know, I don't think that stuff ever gets easier. We just learn how to deal with it a little better. But you've been through a lot in your life and you're still growing, still progressing. If there was one word to describe you, G, what would that one word be? And give me 1 or 2 sentences behind why that one word for you.
One word would be blessed. You know, I really think that I am blessed. I've run the gauntlet in a lot of ways, in a lot of different situations, but always seem to come out on the other end of it ahead, right? And marginally ahead, but ahead of where I was in terms of the person that I am. It could be just like internally. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for so many things. I'm grateful for so many people. I don't have any real thing to be complaining about. We can always complain about little things all over the place, but really, like my mom said to me the other day, she said, I pray every day that God blesses you and takes care of you. Like your parents, that's what they want, right? And I told her, I said, Mom, I'm blessed now. This is not something that's going to happen in the future. This is happening to me right now. So I feel that God has done that. I feel that I've gone through a lot of different scenarios and I've dealt with a lot of different people with a lot of different intentions that on the other side of it, I've been able to come out a little bit ahead. I'm not stuck in that situation. And it's made me, like, again, it's helped me in a lot of ways.
Gee, thank you so much for your time, man. You know, you've always been good to me. You've always gave me a straight answer. If you didn't know something, you said, Akeem, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But you always gave me a straight answer. And I always appreciated that, because sometimes a lot of people don't really do that. But thank you again for your time, G. I appreciate it, man. And hopefully we can do a part 2 in the future, when the good Lord blesses me with the studio to make it all come to fruition.
Well, you know what, Akeem, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Continue doing what you're doing. I do follow some of your stuff. I'm on there checking it out, hearing what you've got to say. You're inspiring people, which is the right thing to be doing. And I think your story, your experiences, all those things come to bear. And even if people listen to everything you say and they can take a nugget out of it to put into their own lives to better themselves in the future, you're doing some good work. Continue doing it. Okay. And all the very best. I know you're getting ready to get married and new, part, new journey in life. I think all of that is fantastic. All the very best.
Thank you so much, man. Let's stay in touch.
All right, for sure.
All right.